one point, I'm not sharing my video. We are at a conference in a hotel and I don't trust the Wi-Fi.
And I will see. I wanted to give somebody a face to look at. And so, yeah. Hi. So we're here to talk about today conflict resolution and de-escalation with teens. And I really love this presentation for a lot of reasons, but the really honest reason is because Libby put the cutest pictures in it, and I just personally really enjoy that. And so it says, I'm not arguing, I'm just offering a relentlessly contrary point of view.
I still feel that deeply in my soul as a not teenager, that I just continuously offer a relentlessly contrary point of view. It speaks to me.
I do too. And sometimes I have to be like, wait, that's not the right thing.
Right. When we are in the helping role, it's important for us to be like, wait, let me take that side of me and put it to, in the little corner. Let me put that away while working with teens, for sure.
Exactly. Because yes, we're going to get into that. I started to get ahead of myself. Yes. So without further ado.
Well, I also want to point, just in case you weren't with us last time, please do put comments, thoughts in the chat. Marina is presenting, but she's also going to keep her eye on the chat because I trust my computer to show the video or show the PowerPoint, but not to show my face. I don't think it can do both things at the same time. So please put questions, thoughts in the chat, and we will make sure that we talk about those as well as we continue to go, because we want to make sure that this is not just us talking at you, but talking with you.
Yeah.
Which is also a good way to deal with conflict.
It also helps you stay awake.
Totally.
It's Tuesday, right? Yeah, Tuesday morning.
I just do what my calendar says to.
It's the same. Okay. So if you weren't here last week, just to give a little bit background on us and where we're coming from, we work for a place called Our Friends Place. It is a nonprofit in Dallas that serves, within its residential program, serves young women 18 to 24 who are not pregnant or parenting. Our ladies go to school, they go to work, they pay rent, all of those things. So if you ever have any young ladies that need a place to learn some of those skills for stability, then that we always would love a phone call from you. Our number is at the bottom. And then Libby and I work in our non-residential side, which we call Source of Success, which is a prevention education programming. So it's started off just focusing on youth. And then we quickly realized that in order to be the most effective, everyone needs these skills. Everyone needs to be equipped with the same things, even if we think we know it already, right? Me and Libby have a learning mindset. We're constantly, like we said, we're at a conference right now because we're constantly seeking out those opportunities to learn and to grow in our skill set, especially to improve our work with young people. So hopefully today that does that for you.
Also, just to do our development and social media folks proud, please follow us on Facebook, Instagram, or LinkedIn at Our Friends Place. I think we also have a YouTube. I'm clearly not the social media person, but I feel like I can tell them and they'll be proud of me that I said that out loud. So what is conflict? What are your thoughts? Go ahead and put them in the chat. What does it mean to you when you hear the word conflict?
Power struggle, disagreement, a couple of disagreements, lots of disagreements, emotions, disagreement in views, misunderstanding, needs not being met. I see you, Lauren. When people disagree, difference of opinion. Oh, I love the honesty, Anna. My first thought was a war. Yeah, right now especially. I think that's definitely timely. And perspectives do not match. break in boundaries, spoken or unspoken. You guys are on it this morning. You've definitely had your coffee. Emotions colliding. Yeah.
That's awesome. I have not had my coffee. I'm waiting to be able to exit this place and get some pumpkin spice.
Yes, I don't know if any PSA for anybody who doesn't know that the pumpkin spice cold foam and PSL are back at Starbucks, and they do not pay us for this, but they should.
They should.
Yes. And then diverging expectations and or incongruent needs. So yeah, I really, I'm gonna, and I don't say this to every group, even though it feels like one of those things that you say to every group, but these are really like some of the best responses. I'm like, dang, like we don't even need to go through the definitions.
Yeah, we're done. Thank
it.
y'all.
Yeah, we can go home now.
Have a great day.
Yeah.
No, stay, please. Stay here.
Yeah, there's more. Wait,
there's one that I want to talk about, and I don't know if I want to talk about it here, Marina, so tell me if I need to stop. But the power struggle one, as a response, like I think that is often what conflict feels like, right? Is this kind of push and pull for who has the power. And sometimes it even feels like somebody is testing the boundaries, right? Especially when you're working with younger folks, that they're just testing the waters to see who they can push and what they can do. But I also think for those of us as helpers, right, in this role as support people for youth, it really helps us in dealing with conflict when we stop thinking about it as power, right? The youth might be thinking of it as power, right? That teen might be sitting there like, oh, I'm gonna take the power. Oh, I'm gonna say the thing. Oh, I'm gonna do the thing. But when they aren't met with what they expect, right? This is something that is just really interesting about humans in general. When we expect a response and we don't get it, we change up what we're doing, right? We change how we react, what we say, like everything about ourselves, right? And so if you're working with someone who is trying to test those waters, trying to take the power, right? And instead of you then getting into this kind of tug of war situation, if you just let them go, right? You just let that rope go. We've all been in tug of war. We've all probably been on the receiving end of our older sister letting go of the rope, or maybe it's just me and I'm reliving childhood trauma here. But you fall, right? If you just let it go, let them have it, they get to a point where they're like, wait, what do you mean? What do you mean? This isn't a struggle. I don't have to fight. I don't have to argue. I don't have to, right? If we change the way that we interact, then we are forcing them to change the way that they interact as well. And I just think that that's a really important thing, because I think we are taught to think of conflict as kind of a power struggle. But when we change the way that we perceive it, then we also change the way that it goes, right? The cause and effect of it. So
and we'll talk more about that later, because Libby definitely did skip. But you know what? It's gonna be fine. It's gonna be fine.
I haven't had coffee. I told y'all. I wanted to pull it out because
I mean it was good stuff.
So you don't have to make me feel better. It's fine. Okay, go ahead, Marina.
So we do like to start. I agree. Like we said, we agree with all of these definitions. These really kind of get to the heart of what conflict feels like and what it looks like. And we are going to talk about that a little bit more. But we go with we just want to throw up some dictionary definitions so that we have some shared space of where we're coming from when we talk about conflict, right? So a lack of agreement or harmony, a physical dispute between opposing individuals or groups. So I see a person who said they thought about a war.
Mm-hmm. A war is like the big one, right? Sometimes it's just fists.
Yes. An earnest effort for superiority or victory over another. And we're really going to talk about that and focus on that definition of conflict when it comes to our youth and in the work that we do with them. This is, again, youth will see that this is why this is one of my favorites. I mean, it makes me want to draw my fingers, but I know mine wouldn't look as cute as this, and it would just look like a baby drew on them.
Well, I really like this picture too, because it's the two people in the middle that are clearly in conflict, right? That are clearly having that lack of agreement or harmony, whatever that is. But then you look at the poor pointer and pinky fingers, and they're like, what is happening? Why? Right. And I think that that's also important to recognize that conflict is not just between the people in the conflict, but it also has ripple effects to those people that are on the outskirts and around.
You have a very mature outlook on it. When I look at it in my head, I'm like, Bill, I told you not to fight again. Nancy, let me handle this. Like it's, that's where I go, is I give them names.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Well, they have names. That's what your fingers are named. Like middle and ring are fighting, and then your pointer and pinky are scared.
Okay.
Anyway, welcome to our TED Talk.
Okay. So if you didn't come to last week, I'm very sorry to inform you that this is a very different type of presentation, and that we do a lot of introspection. So a couple of ground rules before we get started is that this is a no judgment zone. This is a honesty moment between you, yourself. I tried to say me, myself, and I, but like in you, yourself, and you, but that didn't work the same. It didn't feel right, at least. But it's just for you. If you feel like sharing in the chat, then we can definitely do that. But we understand that this is in order for you to have that vulnerability with yourself. That sometimes that comes with feelings, right? But this is a no shame, this is honesty, right? So we're going to go through, and I want you to think about how do you handle conflict. And they might look a little bit different depending on the situation, who it's with, because as Libby kind of talked about, like we get into habit loops with the way that we handle things. And as professionals, I think it also comes into play that we might handle conflict at work with a colleague different than conflict with a client or a team that we're working with. And then it's different the way that we would handle conflict at home. And so, but anyway, without further ado,
sorry. I'm just, every time you say without further ado, I'm going to add something. I'm sorry. This is my second time. I apologize. And I just want to call out something that you said. So the question is, how do you handle conflict? And I think most of us have learned to adapt the way that we handle conflict to the person we're working with, the environment we're within, the relationship we have, right? How close, how far, right? The way we handle conflict with acquaintances or coworkers may be very different. For me, it is incredibly different than the way I handle conflict with my sisters, right? And it should be, right? Because I think that when we handle conflict, the more tools we have in our toolbox, right, the more different ways that we can handle that conflict with different people, then the more successful we are. And so I think that we have all probably learned to adapt. And so if you're going to put in the chat, how do you handle conflict, as we go through some of the responses we've gotten from some other folks and from research, and kind of think through, like, what are your top 2 or 3 go-tos, right? Because more likely than not, you don't just do the exact same thing over and over again, right? It goes back to that same, like, if you see the whole world as a nail, then everything is a hammer. Yes, everything is a hammer, right? No, if you only use a hammer, then everything is a nail, whatever that quote is, right? And so again, that's one of the things that we've learned to adapt. We have multiple tools in our toolbox, not just that one hammer.
Yeah. Okay. So raise my voice or yell, use force, verbal or physical. I just want to call that one out for a second. I think that that's one that we always go to extremes when we think about it, right? When we visualize force, we think of abuse. We think of someone screaming in someone's face. And we don't think about how using force verbally can be a calm voice, just being or saying things that maybe are a little bit firmer, right? Getting physical. I have pushed people. If my brother and I get together, even as an adult, if my brother and I get together, we definitely shove each other, play around, get more physical, especially if we have a conflict. And that's because that's how we handle stuff as kids, right? And so some of that kind of comes into play. And I share that just so that you know, again, we all have
different things.
Yes, thank you. So forgive, let others have their way, give in, apologize, that is me, make a deal, walk away, complain, use humor or make a joke, cry, me also, call each other's names, suggest solutions, assign blame, ignore it. I saw someone else said in the chat that that's what they do. Walk away. Wait, no, get upset. Look for a win-win. Threaten. Understand all points of view. Ask for help from someone else.
Oh, sorry.
No, it's fine. Okay, so let me see in the chat. Someone said, when I'm regulated, I take a minute to check in with myself. Then I focus on the other person and listen to understand their side. I like to reflect and validate their feelings. I often learn that conflict isn't really about what it seems. I love that answer.
Can we talk about that for a second too? Because when we were talking about sometimes you change up the way that you respond to conflict because of other people and external forces, but that one calls out when I'm regulated, right? So also internal forces change the way you deal with conflict, right? When I am in a good headspace, when I am regulated, I might understand all points of view, suggest solutions, maybe even use humor to diffuse the situation. When I am dysregulated, when I am tired, when I'm hungry, when I'm whatever that is, I may ignore, I may walk away, I may slam a door, right? Like we all have these different things that we might do depending on what's going on inside, not just what's going on outside.
Yeah. And again, we're going to kind of touch on that some more, but thank you, Libby, for providing that insight for now as well. And then we have a couple, I tried to avoid conflict at all costs, a couple compromise, we're going to talk about that. Walk away, I feel you. Not regulated, I tend to either try to avoid it or just start agreeing with the other person, or I focus on trying to win. Ooh, I love it. I love it. Just wait, there's more. Depending on the situation, when I work with students, suggest solutions, use humor, make a deal, walk away, give in. Great, these are awesome. At home with my husband, deep breath to remind myself to use I feel statements / trigger him to know I'm about to share something I've been struggling with. With my friends, I tend to avoid it until I can reflect on what's going on inside of me. Yes.
Well, and I think that Marina started this with there's no judgment, right? And I think that often when we go to conflict resolution sort of trainings, we are told there was a right way to do it, right? And there was a wrong way to do it. And if you ignore and avoid, you're bad, right? And I don't think that that's true. I think for some relationships, for some folks who are more internal processors and take more time, ignoring, walking away, giving yourself that break is probably the best thing you can do, right? Or for those of us who are like 0 to 60, I want to set things on fire, angry, right? During certain conflicts. That's me. There is also, I think, a certain point where kind of reminding yourself, okay, I actually really love this person. I actually really enjoy this person. I would like to keep them in my life. And maybe I don't need to say the really mean, petty things that are coming to my mind right now, right? So I'm going to walk away. I'm going to tell them I need space. I'm going to, and then come back to it later if it still is important to me then, right? And so I think that there is a certain point where all of these have their place. All of these have their time in your life and in your worlds, and none of them are wrong or bad, right? It just is what is right for you at the time, and giving yourself that time to choose what you're going to do.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about this a little bit further in the next slide, or the next couple of slides, but a lot of these responses are rooted in our body's like need for survival, right? So when we talk about fight, flight, freeze, fawn, right, as those responses that are hardwired inside us to get us through a situation. And we're going to talk about that more, but oftentimes conflict puts us in that, it triggers that central nervous system like reaction to that conflict and makes you go, I have to survive. Right. And so we're going to explore a little bit how to take ourselves out of that, how to move our teams out of that. But that's where a lot of it comes from. So survival is never a bad thing, right? it's always a good thing. It's just how do we figure out how to use those things for our good?
Yeah. And I think it also, and we'll talk more about this too, also when you've acted out of survival, because that central nervous system kicks in and our ability to think through consequences kind of takes a backseat, right? When you've acted out of survival, also trying to figure out, okay, what do I do now, right? How do I make up for this? What is my next step? Because now the consequences are in your brain, right? And your brain is functioning in an appropriate way. And so then what do you do? So, but we'll talk more about that.
Yeah, I'm going to go through these really quickly so then we can move on. My therapist told me that most conflict comes from my internal feelings and not external issues. I feel that. I think there's definitely external conflicts, especially when you talk about those like political, social, moral differences, that have affected our world. But ultimately, I think those come from internal. They all start internal, right? And then they move to that external.
Well, I think, sorry. I was just thinking about that comment because it makes really good sense to me, right? I think we often try to think of conflict as not being personal, but it is always personal. That's why it exists, right? Yep. Because if it was just something that was happening and it didn't affect me, I'd be like, oh, that's happening, right? Like, but because it's personal, right? It starts with my feelings, my emotions, my opinions, my perspectives, the things that are important to me. That's why I get the heart racing, the palms sweating, I need to react in whatever survival way I'm going to do, or I'm going to choose my reaction, whatever those options are. But yeah, so I really like that, right? Because it really does start with something deep in you, and then it's your response to it, right? Yeah. No matter if the other person wants you to get upset, right? It's your choice, right? One way or the other. And sometimes it doesn't feel like a choice because it is that survival mode, but it is within us that we respond or don't.
Yeah. And then I just have some of my people in here, got some crying, some walk away. So because I shut down to avoid harming anyone. So, okay. So let's talk about what all this means, because this is just a bunch of words. So I want to talk about go on a journey with us. Here's some common thoughts about conflict that kind of summarizes everything we just talked about.
Not just a journey with us, but a journey with the angry otter attached to a balloon.
He's, again, my favorite. So the first one is someone talks about that winning, right? And we talked about that, trying to push or trying to dominate over someone else, right? Trying to win. And so that is, we'll explore that a little bit more, but so oftentimes when we are in conflict, we approach it as a win-lose, right? Someone's going to win, someone's going to lose. That is just human nature. Not saying that you can't adapt from that, but that's where we start, right? Because that comes from that survival thing. And like there's a threat happening and I have to overcome that threat. I have to dominate that threat or I might die, right? And at the end of the day, that's what drives us. And then they consider the other parties in argument or conflict as opponents. So even if it's somebody that you have a deep, caring relationship with, right? Or students that your or teenagers in your life, that your role is to walk beside them in their young people, adolescent journeys. It's still, anytime there's a conflict, like it's still that hardwired thing of like, you now are my opponent because this is a win-lose, right?
Right. They are now the villain and I am the hero. And now we are, yes.
And then they allow communications with others or the other person involved in the conflict to worsen or break down altogether. So that kind of touches on the fact that when we oftentimes, not every time, but oftentimes when we're in conflict with somebody, our ability to listen, if we are feeling these things, right? If we're feeling threatened, I can't listen to you, right? It's not even that I don't want to, it's that if I'm feeling threatened, or if I'm feeling overwhelmed, or if I'm feeling all the things that you guys talked about with like that goes into that dysregulation, right? Then we can't communicate on this. It's not a choose thing, right? And so then it just what happens when that happens is if we're in a situation where the other person doesn't let us walk away, or we don't recognize that in ourselves that we need to walk away, then we may escalate that, right? And so it kind of feeds into that worsen or breakdown altogether, you know, because I don't know about y'all, but when I am feeling that way, I'm going to say whatever I need to say to get that person to go away. And then I will feel the regret later.
As you were talking, I was thinking of like a snake when it feels threatened, it coils, right? And it kind of folds within itself.
Yeah.
And then if the threat continues, right? Yeah. Like then, and it just stays still. And then if the threat continues, then that's when it jumps. And so that's what it was. That's where my mind was going when you were talking.
That was some very deep visualization for this.
Oh, you know, I watch a lot of Animal Planet, so
I see that. They limit their own possibilities and abilities for negotiating a solution that is acceptable to all concerned. We're going to talk more about that. But oftentimes when we are in conflict, it feels like that there's no solution possible, right? That it's just, again, I just have to win. Like I'm not okay with any of their suggestions. Like they don't have my best interest at heart. And so I just have to make sure. And so we forget that we are capable of doing all those things that you were talking about in the chat, of listening and putting yourself in their shoes, all those things, right? That we forget that we're capable of that and that we can do that.
And I think that this one, like to your point, talks about the rest of them, right? Like if you are the villain in my life because we're in the middle of a conflict and I have to win and you have to lose, right? Because if I don't win, then I lose. And that's not the thing that I'm going to be okay with.
No.
And I'm not talking to you or even really listening to you, then the possibility or even the full actual ability to negotiate and find a solution where we are together, right, is completely out the window. It doesn't exist. And so this is all like all of the three above culminates in that point.
I don't really care how many times we do this. Every time I feel attacked,
sorry,
I do. Like I'm like I say this, and we're here teaching on it, and I'm like, dang, I have things still to learn.
As we all do.
Yes. And the last one. We look at the present situation through the lens of our past experiences. Okay. So again, going back to that hardwiring, those survival instincts, or those fight, flight, or freeze automatic responses to conflict or perceived threats, is developed because we always use this example, and it's my favorite, is back in the day, right? Our ancestors, if they came across a saber-toothed tiger, they're going to have one of those reactions, right? Like if they ran away, then maybe they got eaten still, right? If they just stood there, maybe they got eaten. And then if they froze, they probably got eaten. But the fight, those people had a chance. And so that's hardwired, right? But then the next time they see that, they're like, oh yeah, my friend, I saw people, right? So they kind of learn that their experience or from the past. Maybe they're the fastest person to run and they lost some friends along the way because they didn't run as fast. But that is something that is hardwired in us, right?
Or maybe they did freeze and the saber-toothed tiger was like, oh, a rock, that's not for me, and kept going, right? Like that's what trauma does to us, right? It teaches us what worked in the past and what's going to work moving forward.
Yeah. And even if it's not a trauma, like a trauma event that, like the way we talk about trauma, like those big things, trauma can be a series of little things that deeply affect us, right? It can be as little as I got into that last time I had XYZ happen, I was wearing the color red. And so now I can't wear red anymore, right? Because our brain just wants to protect us. And so it is human nature for us to look at the situations we're in and say, last time I was here, I recognized this, the XYZ happened. And so I'm going to treat it in a similar way, or I'm going to treat that person in a similar way, even if they're a different person, because I know how this is going to end. I know what the potential dangers are here. And so in order to stay safe, I'm going to just do what has worked before. Right.
Well, and this is something that we all do, all humans, if we're honest with ourselves, do it. I think it's something that we hear a lot from the teens that we work with too, right? Well, if they talk to me like that, if they roll their eyes at me like that, if they this, that, and the third, then I'm going to, right? Like they can verbalize what actions will happen, right? What that other person will do, and then exactly what they're going to respond with, right? Well, if they do that, then I'm going to punch them in the face. If they do that, then I'm going to tell their whole business to the whole world. If they do that, then, and they have this like automatic response because their brains aren't fully developed, because they are constantly in survival mode as teens in this world, but also just the way that their adolescent brain works and how important their peer groups are, right? Which means that they have to kind of deal with conflict in a similar way, right? Because that's what their peer group accepts. And if no supportive adult is showing them a different way to deal with conflict, or is talking with them through a different way to deal with conflict, then they don't know there's another option, right? So this last one, we often hear this, and if we really think about it, we have heard most of our teens say, well, she said blah, 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 and so now I have to, right? It's a requirement, not just a now I get to choose what I'm going to do, but now it's saying I have to take this next step, go to this next level. And so I think that is also one of the things that we hear a lot from teens. And I think one of the things that we tell ourselves as adults, but we don't necessarily communicate it out loud like that to people.
Yeah. Again, feel free to put into the chat if you have any thoughts as we go through, because we will pause to have that discussion. But so I want you to think back to, Libby, go ahead and next one. So I want you to think back to what your common responses were, because all of those common responses fall under some areas. So first one is avoiding or withdrawing from a conflict, right? So like Libby said, this is not a hierarchy. So we're going to go through a couple of these, and it's not a like we're moving to self-actualization. Like, no, this is not Maslow's hierarchy of needs. This is just different categories for labeling those responses. So avoiding or withdrawing from a conflict. And then
sorry, I also want us to think about, again, to Marina's point earlier, I think we go to extremes. So like avoiding or withdrawing means I'm running away and I'm never talking to that person again, and I'm ghosting them for the rest of my life. But sometimes avoiding or withdrawing is I'm sitting in the room and I'm completely quiet and I'm not going to engage, right?
I get on my phone.
Right. And so we've all worked with a teen or an adult or been this person where a conflict has started, and maybe it's not like a massive, full blown out, we're all upset, but hey, we're going to make this change. This person doesn't feel comfortable with that, but they're not going to say anything. They're going to sit there, they're going to be quiet, and they're not going to engage. Right. And we've worked with teens who have felt like complete brick walls because they are not engaging, right? They are just like, nope, this isn't for me and I don't want to be a part of it. And so they just kind of go away in their brains.
Giving in or accommodating the other party. So my folks who are like, I just apologize, or I do whatever they want, or I give in. That is, I live there.
Or even though it's not worth the conversation, it's not worth the fight,
or it's not worth the energy. It's not worth the energy it's going to take for me. Yes, thank you, Libby. Yes, you hear me say that all the time. Like, it just wasn't worth the energy I was going to put into it.
Right. Well, and I think that comes from an assumption, right? The assumption is that if that it will take a ton of energy, and also that it'll end up negative, right? And so you're assuming that it'll end up negative. You're assuming it'll take a lot, and so because of that, it's just not worth it. I'm gonna back away. It's not worth it.
Standing your ground, essentially competing with the other party, doing anything to win, right? So when I said standing your ground, I don't mean just standing up for yourself, right? Because that can definitely be fall under standing your ground. But it can also be those times when we are listening ears turn off and we again are just like repeating over and over again. I don't know if anybody else has started watching House of the Dragon or House of Dragon, but every time I start to watch anything in the game world, I start to like remember things. And so I kind of think of it like old Door, you know, that scene, and where he just repeats over and over again, and that's all he ever can say because of that trauma he experienced. And I'm like, dang, you know, you don't even know until towards the end of the season or the series. But that can be what standing your ground looks like too, is it can look in a positive way. It can be just sitting, like refusing to stray from what your boundary you're setting. So just repeating yourself. It can look like refusing to listen and just saying, this is what we're going to do. If you don't want to do that, like, this is what I said I would do, right? It can look a million different ways. But it doesn't always just look like standing up for yourself. It can be in reality, like Libby said, like it can look different.
Well, and I was thinking about one particular young woman I worked with last year, and the conversation was, well, do you think you could do something different? I mean, if everything that you do is the exact same result, you know, maybe if we try something different. And she was like, well, I'm just going to be me. I'm going to be me 100% of the time, and they can accept it or not. That is a very stand your ground response, right? Like, I don't care how it affects other people. I don't even care if I love those other people and it affects them negatively. It doesn't matter to me. I'm going to do what I do and I'm going to be who I am, which is also like really great to have as a perspective, but also recognizing that no one lives this world on their own. And so, you know, so we had to have a lot of conversations around that, but it's like, if they don't like it, then whatever. It's very much a stand your ground. And it's that for some people works really well. And for other people, they end up losing a lot of really important people in their lives.
Yeah. Okay. So several of you said compromising. Okay. And I had always, when we talked about conflict, any conversation I've ever had on it, compromising was the only thing we talked about, right? We didn't talk about any of these other things. We didn't talk about how they could possibly serve us, right? Because like Libby said, like these are just different approaches, because I don't know about you, but there are certain times in my life that I am doing the world a favor, especially the person I'm in conflict with, by avoiding or withdrawing or giving in at the moment. And then until it's I have an opportunity to gather myself. I'm a verbal processor, so I have to be especially careful with the way that I approach conflict, because I will word vomit stuff out that I don't mean. But again, it's that defense thing of, I'm just going to say whatever I have to say to win, and then it'll be over. And then that's where it sinks in. And I'm like, oh, dang, that wasn't right. And so sometimes I often avoid or withdraw or give in in order to protect the people that I care about from those reactions. And so all of these have a place, but compromising, which is agreeing to negotiate larger points and let go of small things, is, by just the very basis of it, is a win-lose, right? Sometimes you leave happy, sometimes you leave sad, but there's always that little bit of like bummer. I always give this example, and I don't know why, but this is where my mind goes. I think it's because it's my life. But I think about, has anybody here ever had a craving for food? Okay. I want you to think about what you want to eat right now for lunch. That's always for you. There's a Taco Cabana near here. Anyway, so I want you to think about if you really wanted food, and then you go to your friends or your partner or coworkers, whoever it is, and they want something different, right? There's a choice there. I can either I can stand my ground and be like, no, this is what I'm eating. You either come with me or not, right? Or I can give in and just say, okay. Or there's a compromise, right? There's an option to say like, okay, like, how about we go here today, whether that's your choice or their choice. And then tomorrow we can go there, or next week, or whatever it is, right? But if you're the person letting go of that place, then you're the one who's left wanting in that situation, right? Compromising, to me, is a really excellent tool when you are not feeling completely regulated, or when you, with people that you don't know well, maybe, or you're getting to know, because it requires, it doesn't require as much trust, right? Like I don't have to think that Libby has my best interests at heart, and that's why she wants me to go eat Thai food today, right? That's like, it's a little bit more simplistic in nature. Whereas,
well, and sorry. I also think compromising, because you talked about like it's still rooted in win and lose. And I think compromising is still this perspective of like, well, if I have to give something up, you have to give something up. So if I have to be unhappy, you also have to be unhappy. We can both be a little bit happy, but we both have to be a little bit sad too, right? Like that's compromising. Is still like, because it's always talked about, let's meet in the middle. Let's both, right, go from our sides and meet in the middle and find that common ground is what it's talked about as. But that common ground still means you started off on the other side, and now we both have to give up, right, our real estate to get to the middle, right? We both have to walk to the middle, which means we have to give up something.
Yeah.
So the only way compromise really works is if we are equally happy and sad, right? Like we have the same amount of happy and sad, for sure.
Yeah. Which I'm not here to say that compromising is bad. And I hope that's not what anybody is getting from this. I just want to talk about something is a little bit, something that requires a deeper understanding, right? And that's called collaboration. We talk about it all the time, but I don't know about you, but I never really thought about what collaboration really is, because when I've used it or heard it in the past, it's more about just like working with someone else. But collaboration involves listening to the other person's side, right? Discussing areas of agreement, coming up with, talking about your individual goals and coming up with common goals, and thinking creatively to resolve the problem without concessions. Libby, can you do another clicky click? Okay, so I don't know if anybody here has ever been in a tandem kayak or canoe situation. But if anybody has and feels like sharing, how did that go? It was a lot of work. Anybody else have a different experience? My sister and I argued. Yeah, my husband and I recently did a canoe experience. It was really great, actually. I'm gonna come back to that. You have to get on the same page to make progress. Once you start communicating, it got easier. You have to work together to move forward. You have to work out a rhythm. Yeah, definitely have to be on the same page, have to be paddling on one accord. And then someone said we just laughed about how badly we were at it. Yes. I love this visualization. If you've ever been on one, and if you haven't, go get on one and then you'll understand. It is a special form of torture until you get to those other things, right? Someone said I did this last year and we could not get on the same pattern. I could not do it with my husband. Went with my sister-in-law, it was much better. Yes. Okay. So kayaking in our tandem activities like that, you are wholly dependent on the other person, right? And they're dependent on you. If you do things wrong, then you, the first time I went canoe or kayaking ever was on a tandem one. And I was like, I'm never doing this again, because it was in high school and I was partnered up with a guy I didn't know that well. And we ended up spinning in circles. We almost tipped over multiple times. We were in this nature lake doing it, which I don't recommend as the first place to ever do any kayaking in a river, because it's too narrow. You need wide open, even like calm water to practice and get down. But that's a side conversation. But anyway, I ended up in like some trees. People had to come rescue us. Like they were like, it was a whole thing. And it was just not great. And so I went camping last Memorial Day, I think. And my husband really wanted to do a tandem one. And I was like, I see several people who said that about their partners. And so I went on tandem bike and I was like, this is going to be awful. And it was at first, like several other people said. And then we figured out that once we could start anticipating each other's needs, right? Communicating, asking questions, talking through where we wanted to go, that it went so much easier, to the point that we went for our anniversary a couple months ago and they only had tandem ones. And the guy was like, have you guys ever done tandem before? And we were like, yeah, we've done it. And we had a great time. But there's a couple things that collaboration requires, right? It requires trust. It requires being regulated, right? And I say that because sometimes spouses, I feel you, lady who said that she didn't do very well with her husband, but did well with her sister-in-law. Sometimes there's such thing as having too much at stake, right? Especially when it's with people that we know intimately, we bring in other things into that. There have been so many fights that I've had, or arguments with my husband, that were not about that thing. It was about a million other things that I couldn't communicate or didn't communicate that I really had a problem with, right? And so that's what we bring into those situations. And so collaboration requires that vulnerability and trust with that other person. And yeah,
I think collaboration also requires practice.
Yes.
I think the first four are really easy for us, right?
Yes.
It's really easy, and I agree.
They don't require any effort. They're
not at all. I think that I agree with you when it's like each of these has their own reasoning, right? Each of them have their own place, right? Somebody once talked to me about the HALT method, right? That when you are upset, when you are frustrated, when you are angry, whatever it is, stopping yourself and asking the 4 questions. Am I hungry? Am I really angry about this? Am I lonely? Am I tired? Right? And if the answer is yes to any of those, I probably shouldn't handle this conflict right now, right? So sometimes I avoid or withdraw from a conflict because I'm hungry, or because I'm angry at them about something else, and I can't talk to them about what this is because I'm really not mad at them about this, right? Sometimes I give in or accommodate because I'm just really tired and I just can't care, right? Like, we'll talk about this later when I have slept. Well, and sometimes, sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I was also thinking, I was like, and sometimes those people closest to us, our family, are the safe people to lose it with, right? Yeah. That's where we can show, because I think in our minds we're like, well, they have to love me, so I don't have to mask how I'm feeling.
Well, and I think, yeah, for sure, those people who are closest to you, there's this feeling that they're always going to be close to you, so that's great. But I think that when we stand our ground and it comes to an actual legitimate argument, it's probably because we aren't regulated, right? Because we are hungry, because we're angry, because we're lonely, because we're tired, because we have these other things going on. And compromising is really great, right? When it's just like, you know what, I don't really care. Can we just find somewhere in the middle, right? I am tired of talking about this. Can we find somewhere in the middle? The thing that I think separates collaboration is the first 4 still assume that the other person or the other party is your opposition, right? It still assumes that one is right, one is wrong, one is on the left, one is on the right, one is just separate from you, right? The thing that changes collaboration for me, and is where I think it's really important that we start to practice this, is when a conflict arises, right? And conflict is different for everyone, right? For some folks, that feeling of conflict can come because there's just been a change, right? Some people don't enjoy change, and change makes them have the feelings of conflict. I personally really enjoy change. I also really enjoy conflict because I think that's where the growth happens. But I know that I am not necessarily the norm on that one. The thing that changes for collaboration is you are not my enemy. We are together, and the conflict is what needs to be fixed. Yes. Right. In the first 4, you need to be fixed because you're wrong, right? You or me, someone does. Collaboration means both of us are good, real, true people, and we need to work together as a team to solve the conflict, right? That's why your boat goes through the water, because your teammate is in that boat with you, right? They're not your enemy. They're not on the other side. They're not doing whatever they want to do. You're working together as a team, and the boat moving forward is your goal, right? Whatever that is. And that is a really hard thing to get to.
Yeah.
it's also a really hard thing to get to when the other person doesn't know that that's what they should be doing, because nobody's ever talked to them about collaborating in that way to deal with conflict, or when that other person just doesn't care and doesn't want to collaborate because they want to see you as an enemy. But that, for me, that's where the practice comes, right? Because if I then am always trying to remind myself to collaborate, I'm always trying to remind myself that this other person is not the problem, that the problem is the problem, right? The conflict is the problem, the situation, the issue is the problem. This other person is my teammate in fixing the problem. Then my approach to conflict is not this push-pull tug of war. It's, hey, that rope's on the ground. What else could we do with it? Right? It's a we, right? And having that conversation. And even sometimes I'll even say it out loud, like, I am not against you. And I don't think you're against me. Right? Like, let me just put that out there. We are together working on this issue. And framing it in that way changes my approach to conflict. And also, if I say that out loud, it usually will trigger the other person to change their approach to their conflict with me as well, because it's not with me, right? We are together working to solve the conflict. Okay.
That was good. That was a lot. We're going to take a little stretch break if you need one. So when conflict escalates, I want everybody to think to themselves again. If you feel like sharing, great. What does it feel like? What does it look like? How does it affect relationships? How does it affect people around? So when you think about the little finger guys, the two ladies who were very concerned, how does it affect witnesses? So any other students in the room, clients, other staff, all of those things. And then again, great picture. Thank you, Libby. So I'll give you a moment to type and reflect. Typing is hard. It feels like being attacked. It feels like not being heard, not respected. Yeah, that makes perfect sense, Carrie. I get really anxious. I feel you. This is me. I feel really anxious when conflict escalates, especially if I'm considered to be a party in the conflict. I sometimes get panic attacks later as a result, or I cry a lot. Anytime I walk into a room or a situation, I say something or someone else says something, and there's that feeling, right? It's palpable, it's on the air, right? Like conflict, everyone knows that when there's a conflict happening, right? And I think that also has to do with that same survival thing. Like it's what tells us something's not quite right here, right? And so when you don't know what that is, or when it comes out of nowhere and you're not expecting it, for some of us, it can make us extremely anxious. I know immediately my palms start sweating, my cheeks get red, and it doesn't even have to be somebody, right? It's a little topic, but Libby was teaching me how to knit the other day, and she's got the needles back. She goes, this is quite moist. And I was like, my palms get sweaty when I'm nervous, and I'm like, learning something new feels like a conflict. Right? Like it's me and the yarn fighting each other. And so those are some things too, like think about what it feels like, but also think about what's happening in you that tells you that there's a conflict happening, right? Because I think that's also important to reflect on. Oh yes, see, Ashley, I got ahead of you, Ashley. Like someone said that the time slows down, the air gets thin. Yes. Feels like when you're at the watering hole and all the other animals get really quiet and you're like, dang, I'm dinner. Like something bad is going to happen, right?
Totally. It's the spidey sense that we develop when we hear the growl and we're like, probably saber-tooth tiger, gotta go, right? Like totally.
Yeah. Feels like not being understood. I shut down completely. Yeah. Feels like you're competing and fighting for validation. Yeah. Scary at times. Yes. And when we work with, any situation, I think especially if you're in a helping profession or you work with teenagers, and Libby talked about that prefrontal cortex, and that's development. And there's a lot of, I think teenagers are not always taught about feelings and how to anticipate, like how do they know what they're feeling, right? We don't really talk about that a lot. And so they can go, it looks like they're going from 0 to 100 at times, but really they've been at 99. And then that one thing tips them over, right? Just like all of us. And so it can be scary, right? Especially when we do remember those times where conflict maybe didn't go well, right? And then my heartbeat gets faster. I spitball everything I say. Yes, especially if you're a verbal processor, you're just trying to fix it as quickly as you can, right? There's that, like, I call it like panic talking. Hard time relaxing. Definitely. I will have like knots in my tummy for, like, if it goes unresolved. I can't stand unresolved conflict. I don't like conflict, but I hate unresolved conflict more. It doesn't have to make sense. It's just who we are. I feel like a failure. Like I didn't do enough. Feels uncomfortable. Feels like tension, trying to escape a cage. Oh, you guys are like deep. Looks like flexing fingers, deep breaths, releasing body tension any way I can, affects others who might be defensive. Yes. Like even if that conflict doesn't have to affect me, I'm on the defensive immediately. Like I'm prepared. I don't know what's about to go down, but I know that I'm going to make it out. Right. I'm going to do what I need to do to make it out.
Well, and I think on top of that too, we don't know other people's reactions or history with conflict, right? And so that's part of where that spidey sense comes from, right? Is like, oh, it's going to go down and I might need to protect myself. I might need to save myself, because in the past, when conflict has happened between two other people, right, I was hurt, I got caught up in the middle of it, whatever it is, right? We don't know people's history with conflict. And so that's where, like, when it affects witnesses, it affects them in ways that we may never know. They may just never come back and talk to us. They may never rely on us, because the way that we played out conflict made them feel unsafe to ever come back, right?
Yeah. This one got me in the gut, to be honest. It says, with others, it feels like the other person is withdrawing love, right? There's that definitely, I struggle with that as well, that fear of rejection, that fear that it's not going to be there if I don't approach a conflict a certain way, right? Or if there is a conflict at all. So I really have enjoyed my relationship with Libby, because I've really come into being more comfortable with that conflict and recognizing it as an opportunity for a deeper relationship. Yeah. So sometimes that mindset shift can be magical. Like it can really help with some of that, those feelings, even though those feelings are there, because it's trying to keep you safe, right? I'm going to go speed through these just because I want to keep us on track. But I really thank you guys for your responses and for your vulnerability, right? Because it's a Tuesday and you don't know me. And it's a lot to really kind of think about these things. Okay. Libby?
Okay. Yes. So what
Okay.
next? Okay. Can I do this first one? Because
you can do all of them. You can do all of them.
Conflicts affects people personally. Okay, thank you. Also, I would like to call out this picture and how this one bird looks like it's about to slap the other bird because they're yelling at each other. I thought it was hilarious. It's fine. Conflict affects people personally. Right? Like we talked about that earlier. It is something that is in us that then it's us personally. That also means, am I still here?
Yes.
Something strange just happened. Okay, good, thank you. So that also means that not only does it affect people personally, that's why they are rising to a conflict, but that also means that when we are in the throes of conflict, we feel personally attacked, personally hurt, personally disconnected. It affects us really personally, right? Even if it doesn't truly have that even if it's not truly that deep, right? It feels like there is this loss of love, this disconnection, this removing of this other person from my life, right? When in reality, we can probably come back through it, right? We can get past it. And the reason it does that is because in conflict, we are taught and trained from a very early age to feel like it is a competition. It is a win-lose, and you are my opponent. But if we think of conflict as we are together to solve the problem, right, then you don't lose people, right? Then they recognize that this relationship is most important. So whenever I am facing a conflict, and I am working with a friend through conflict right now of her own, which gotten sucked into it. But there is a certain point where it's like, listen, I want you to know that I am here for you. I am team you, even though this is a conflict between you and me, I am team you always, right? And so because I am team you, which means I'm team me because we are on the same team, that means that we're going to work through this together. So let's figure it out, right? And so I want to make sure that we have both of our best interests at heart, that we are both working toward this, because this relationship is more important to me than whatever this is that we're going through, right? And so I named that. I like to put all my expectations out on the table. Here's all of the cards that I'm working with, and I don't have any up my sleeve. This relationship is important to me. I would like to make sure that we make it out of this and still be connected and friends and close, which means that whatever this situation is, we're going to work on it together. And if we need to take a break because it's getting too hard or it's getting too personal, let's do that. That's fine. We're going to come back to it though, because our relationship is most important, right? I like to just put it out there. And the people who are closest to me, the people who are still in my life, are those people who engage in that. And those people who don't engage in that are people who either I avoid conflict with because it's just not worth it if I still want them in my life, or I don't have as deep of a relationship with them. And ultimately, the people who are closest to you, who care most about you, will rise to that occasion. That's been my experience. I don't love conflict as in I've always loved conflict. I've had to teach myself to appreciate conflict because it helps build deeper relationships. We talked a lot about trauma reactions, that we choose our actions for survival. And that means that sometimes we say or do things that we wouldn't have normally said or done if we didn't feel like we had to survive in that moment, right? If we were regulated, which to me means that there are many times in which I have to apologize, right? I'm really sorry I said that like that. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to, whatever it is. That also means that when I start to feel myself having those trauma reactions, that I have to say, I need to take a break. I need to take a minute. I need to drink some water. I need to go for a walk. I need to look at the sun. I need to do things. We also act in ways that have worked for us in our past, right? With our own personal history of conflict, which either means our own actual personal history or what we've seen around us in conflict, which means that most of us have probably seen conflict go really poorly at different times. And so again, finding a new way to deal with conflict helps us to build our toolbox and have different ways of dealing with it. Intent versus impact. This is one of those things that always kind of gets me, is when somebody hurts you and when you say you've hurt me and they say, I didn't mean to. I don't care if you didn't mean to. You still did, right? I always use the example of, like, if I'm walking across the street and I am an arm talker, right? I talk with my arms and I'm talking and I accidentally hit a stranger with my arms as I am communicating with a friend. I can't just be like, didn't mean to, and keep going. No, right? I'm so sorry. Are you okay? I didn't mean to hit you, but I'm so sorry that you got hit. How can I help you? Right? How can I make this better? Are you bleeding? Do you need a Band-Aid? Right? Do you need a tissue? What can I do for you? Right? Because it's my responsibility to deal with the impact of my actions and words, right? We do this with strangers, but when it comes to people that we're in conflict with or who are close to us, we just rely on the I didn't mean to, right? If I just walked and then continued to hit people in the face and just kept saying, didn't mean to, didn't mean to, didn't mean to, at a certain point you did, because you knew what was going to happen, right? We are responsible for the impact of our action and words, even if we didn't mean to, right? And if we didn't mean to, but that we had an unintended impact, then we have to change what we're doing because we've learned from the unintended impact of our actions, right? If we keep doing the exact same thing over and over again, then the impact is what we are expecting, right? That is what we are intending at that point. So again, intent versus impact, they are two very different things, but we are responsible for both as individuals, and we often forget that. When people feel attacked, they hurt people, right? Hurt people hurt people. If I am hurt, I shall hurt. That is what happens, right? That is our initial response, right? Because we have to be defending ourselves to survive. That also means that other people do that, right? And so when you're in a conflict and both people are hurt, then they say things that hurt each other, and now we're just in this spiral of pain. If we are at a point where we've been through this training, we've learned some things, and we can be like, oh, this person is hurt, right? I may have hurt them and they are now hurting me. And you can pause it, right? Because again, it's not about, I need to take my enemy down. It's about, hey, I actually really care about you, but we're getting really mean here, right? So how do we take a step back from mean so that we can work together, right? And just bringing it back to, we are together in this conflict, not opposite. We are together.
For sure.
And then also another hidden rule that often happens in conflict is that no one is willing to back down or take a break. No, I'm not. I'm in it to win it. Mortal Kombat style, finish him. That's what I'm here for, right? And that doesn't end well. And so again,
it depends on what your goal is.
But that shouldn't be our goal, right? Our goal should not be finish him. And so I think that that's one of those things that, again, if we find ourselves exhibiting some of these behaviors where we are taking it very deeply personally, where we are acting out of survival and relying on things that helped us to survive in the past, when we are relying on solely our intent and don't care about our impact, when we're hurting people and when we aren't taking a break or backing down, we ourselves are escalating the conflict, right? We as people affect the way that other people respond. And when we are acting in these ways, we are forcing the other person to escalate as well, right? Whereas we could give ourselves a break, take a step back, kind of think through, what am I doing here, right? What's my intent? What is the impact of my choices? And what do I need to do differently?
So with our last 20 minutes, we're going to go through what is de-escalation. You can just do the double click. So it feels like this, right? Putting out fires a lot of times, reducing the intensity of conflict or potentially violent situation, right? Because once stuff escalates, like initially conflict is not, we're not saying all conflict is violent, but all conflict has the potential if it's not de-escalated, right? And the reason why we focus the bulk of this presentation on you, on us, on each of us, and the way that we approach conflict, the way that we handle it, what's going on, is because of those internal reasons that someone shared, right? That a lot of conflict in the way that we approach conflict has to do with what's going on inside. And we have to be able to recognize how it affects us, where we normally go to, what those responses are before we can even start to help de-escalate conflict with others, right? Especially with teenagers. And we also, we don't talk about this in de-escalation, but teaching those teens the same things, right? Teaching them how to recognize where those triggers are, what they're feeling, what that actually looks like when they approach conflict. No matter what your role is, if you have any teenagers in your life, because again, we don't talk about that enough with them. I don't think I truly understand where things were coming from until I was in my bachelor's degree, getting my social work degree. And so we started talking about that where stuff comes from. And I was like, dang, like for years, like I've never been taught to pull that string, right? To pull it, follow it, and go, okay, why? This is my reaction, right? This is the action I'm taking to address something, but why? What is really going on there? So that is why we focus the bulk of this on that, and not just on try all these things and maybe they'll work. So,
well, and just to kind of reiterate, the first step of de-escalating a conflict is de-escalating yourself.
Yes.
And is finding a way to regulate yourself. So Marina said that I'm trying to teach her to knit, and she's doing a really great job. She's just hard on herself. But before I ever gave her the needles, we did a breathing exercise, right? Because we have to regulate ourselves. We have to de-escalate ourselves before we jump into trying to de-escalate a conflict or learn a new thing or anything that we know will help or make us rise, right?
Yeah.
And so the first step is to de-escalate ourselves, which also, to Marina's point, is pulling that string and figuring out, okay, where does this start? We're, following that path.
Yeah. Madison said, plus we're the only controllable factor in conflict. Yeah.
You can control no one but yourself. Yeah.
And sometimes I can't control me. And that's normally when that's my clue. This isn't for me. Okay, so quickly want to go through signs of escalation, and this is for everybody, but this is especially what we have seen in our work with teenagers. So excessive swearing, that's a sign of escalation. That's also a sign of overwhelmed, right? So when someone talked about they try to speed talk to fix it, excessive swearing is that equivalent, it just looks a little bit different, right? Increase in voice volume. If you're not feeling heard, you're not feeling understood, maybe I just need to get louder, right? Defiant attitude. If I'm not feeling heard, not feeling seen, this conflict, like I'm having some things feeling like those are manifestations of that. Tightened jaw. So if you're sitting with a youth and they're looking down, there's tightened jaw. Those are warning signs that they're starting to feel escalated. Bald fist. You can go ahead and I don't know how many there are. Erratic hands, body language. When I start talking with my hands a lot, that is a telltale sign that I'm feeling stressed, right? That I'm feeling at unease, right? Rapid pacing. Like that feeling you can't just sit still. They get that too. That feeling of like, I have to run away, right? So like I have to move because I don't know what to do with all of this.
It's, again, when you kind of think about this, it's that coiled snake, right? It is, sometimes it's also getting really, really still. Sometimes it's also a complete, again, you kind of feel like 0 to 60 with someone where it's like you were completely still a rock and now you're upset, right? It's also about knowing someone, because I talk with my hands a lot, and so that would not be a sign of escalation for me. That's just me communicating, right? And I bounce my leg a lot. That's just me living my life. But some of these other things might show up, and it's about that relationship and knowing that person. It's also just about kind of seeing how other people are reacting, right? Because maybe you don't know this person very well, but other people do. Okay. So how can you de-escalate conflict?
I was like, we can just keep. Okay, so I read somewhere in there, someone said I statement, right? And I had to, when we were having this conversation about putting this together originally, I said I statements, I was like, are great. I was like, but I heard them used incorrectly. And so we're gonna show what I'm talking about here. So this is an example of an I statement, right? I understand that you are upset about this situation. That you is or not an I statement, but just a regular statement, right? I understand that you are upset about this situation. Clicky click for me.
Which is very similar to I understand that you're crazy, right? It's an I statement used for an attack.
You're out of control. You're whatever. Yeah.
Right.
Versus I'm feeling this again. I always have to give the caveat. This is not how people talk, or at least that's not how I talk in situations. But just for the sake of clarity, we wrote out this one that I'm feeling stressed out right now. So taking that responsibility, right? Like taking that burden off of them, especially if you're noticing those escalation stages, instead of saying, I see that you were upset and right, or I'm feeling threatened, like, no. Right? Is there a different way or time we could have this conversation? Because I'm not able to respond in a helpful way at this time, right? Or can we both take a moment? How much time do you think we should take, right? Giving them some of that ownership in that of like, are you good with waiting until tomorrow? Are you good with waiting or would it be okay if I said, we sat for 15 minutes or whatever that is, or deep breathing.
Which all of that is collaborating, right?
Yes. And so
when you make an I statement out of collaboration versus opponents, right? I understand that you're wrong. I understand that you're upset. I understand that you're crazy. I understand that you're losing your mind right now, right? That's a me versus you.
Instead of
or I'm take a break. Can we please do some breathing exercises? Can we please come back to this at a later time? The we, right, couched in how I am feeling. And I'm not feeling that because of you. I'm feeling that because that's how I'm feeling.
Yeah.
Right.
I've even told you sometimes, like, I'm feeling like I just have all this energy and stuff. Do you mind if we walk while we talk about this? Right. Getting some movement or whatever it is, but just taking that ownership, because it, I love what you were talking about, Libby, about the relationship and stuff. That when we, the I statement, not attacking, or like, I'm feeling this or whatever, that taking that ownership of like what you're feeling and not assuming what they're feeling, what they're experiencing. I think, and offering them that buy-in of that choice, right? So like, is this like, can we do this? I'm feeling this way. Like, can we do one of these things, whatever it is, right? Or offering those choices. That is the surest way for me, if I'm in a conflict with somebody, to feel seen and to take that that pressure off of it's me versus you, and into like, I genuinely care about what you need as well. Like, I'm worried about what I need, but like, I want us both to be good. Like, is that good?
It models it too, right? So if I am in a conflict and I'm like, man, I am overwhelmed right now. Can we just go for a walk? Can we just kind of sit for a minute? Can I just think through what I want to say? The number of times that the other person is like, me too, I am also overwhelmed, right? Like, it models and makes it okay to own your feelings and say, this is what's happening in me. And then they're like, yeah, me too.
Yeah.
I would love to take a break. That would be great. That's a great idea, right? Like, and it's not like it's hunky-dory. Yes, that's fantastic. But the amount of times that people have responded with, yeah, me too, let's take a break, right? Like, is really helpful.
Yeah.
It's really helpful to model that.
Well, I was thinking about when you said modeling, that's fine to keep going, but when you were talking about modeling, I was thinking about, I don't know if anybody here keeps fidgets in their classroom or at their desk or wherever they're interacting with other people, but I always take one no matter what. Because, and I always make a comment about like, oh, I have to have one of these because I don't know what to do with my hands, or it helps me when I'm feeling nervous, to model that for them, that it's okay. Because if I just ask them, oftentimes they're going to say no about having that. But giving them something to do with those hands when it is a difficult situation or conflict, I think just does wonders. And I don't think that's on one of these, but, and then empathy. This feels in a room full of, or I guess a Zoom full of helpers, right? People who, like, you didn't come here today if you didn't care about the teams that you work with. You didn't come here today if you enjoyed the conflict that can come up during the natural helping process or learning process with those young people, right? And so this feels like one of those that like, oh yeah, but I think that sometimes we get stuck in those habits, right? Where we are not regulated, right? We're feeling burnout, we're feeling disconnected. We've been doing this a lot of times, so all these kids are the same, or we're constantly comparing. All those things are natural. And so reminding ourselves to root ourselves back in that empathy, right? Finding a way to connect with those youth. That should happen before conflict ever erupts, right? If you try to do this during the conflict and you have no relationship established, right? You don't, like Libby said, like, you don't know them, it can be incredibly difficult. And so,
but not impossible.
No, I said difficult.
Not impossible.
Yeah.
Because there are times when you walk into a conflict situation where you're just responding to it and you don't know the people, but you know that there's a conflict erupting, right? And so it's not impossible to have the empathy to help diffuse the situation if you don't know them. It's just, you have to be more communicative about it, right? Like, I really want to understand, and I really do care about making sure that y'all are comfortable and having you right. Like, it's just more communicative and putting it out there.
Yeah. And part of that empathy too is asking yourself, why would the conflict feel this way? Why would they be so upset? This isn't like them. Instead of saying that, I have many times throughout my work with young people, I've worked with many an angry young person, as most of us have. And one of the major things that I do when I work with those is part of that empathy is also allowing them the space to feel what they need to feel in the way that they need to feel it, right? So anytime I've met with students, I've always had use the words you need. I one time had a student come in, they're like, our young person I was working with that came in and they're yelling and screaming, and, to someone else, it looks like they're out of control. I knew them and I was like, they're in perfect control of themselves. They are just so pent up with, because it was a young man who didn't talk to anybody, it was so pinned up that he finally felt like he could express it. And if I had told him to, that wasn't the right way, instead I'm like, great, like he's talking to me.
Yeah.
He's finally like, here, I'm getting to what is actually going on. Right.
And I think one of the greatest things with that phrases that I've used with empathy is also, you have every right to feel this way, and validating how they feel. Because I don't ever get to tell anyone that they don't get to feel how they feel. You're feeling that way for a reason, and you have every right to feel that way. Yeah. And so I don't understand it. Maybe we have different lived experiences, and you're responding to this in a way that I don't need to understand, because you have every right to feel the way that you feel. What I would like to do is, how do we move past you feeling that way, right? How do we understand that and take that next step?
Well, and how do you feel those things in a safe way?
Right. And so then also
knowing that it affects other people too.
Right. Because other people are seeing it, witnessing it. And not only does it affect other people, it affects future you, right? Because maybe they'll think of you as this really big, bad, negative person, when in reality, you're feeling feelings that are hard to feel.
We have 7 minutes.
Yep, I know. So negotiation is also giving options that you and they can live with, right? Yeah. So listening to their feedback on those options and coming to an agreement. So this is all about collaboration, right? This isn't we can deal with the conflict or we can't, right? Because not dealing with the conflict isn't an option that you should want for a young person, right? They need to figure out how to deal with it and how to live with it, because they're going to be dealing with conflict for the rest of their lives. So you give options. We can talk about it now. We can talk about it later. We can talk about it after school. We can talk about it tomorrow morning. Hey, how about would you like to drink some water while we talk about it? Do you just want to take a few minute break? Like, giving them options and collaborating on what that solution is, so that you can both live with it and both feel validated in it. And then also redirection done right? That's what that negotiation is. It's hey, you know what? Actually, what you're doing right now might not be the best for you, right? This is going to come back to bite you, especially if you keep doing this in the future. So let's do something different.
Well, and redirection too can look like that going for a walk, right? Yeah. Especially if you're starting to see those escalation signs, like redirecting that energy, like, hey, I don't know, sometimes like, you want to go for a walk? Do you want to go play basketball? Do you want to do whatever? Like giving them that movement, giving them a place to put that energy is redirection.
Totally.
Sometimes you both just,
go ahead.
Sometimes you both just need space and time, right? Modeling those appropriate ways to take back from the conflict, because it is hard for us and we're adults, right? I don't know why it is that we expect more from these young people when we're all here talking about how hard this is to do, right? To ask for that space, to take a step back, to feel comfortable with that, setting those boundaries, right? And respecting when other people have those boundaries. So the most important thing about that space and time is that follow through. So I had a person ask me one time that they're like, so you just let it go? like if we're having conflicts and they're not acting appropriately for the setting, do we just let it go? I'm like, no, you don't just let it go, but you let it go in that moment. Because if I try to correct behavior while someone is escalating or we're in a conflict, that is not going to be effective at all, right?
It escalates it worse.
It's gonna, yes, I mean, I'm gonna be honest, like anyone did that to me, like Libby can tell you, I'm a very like, I don't go from 0 to 100. I go like, I start slowly and it takes a while to get to 100 for me, unless I'm hungry. But again, that's separate. But I was like, so I lost my train of thought on that.
But yeah, the first, you were going to say, I think the first time, for me anyway, from my perspective, the first time somebody tells me, hey, can you calm down? Hey,
Yes,
you're getting a little emotional here. That is the quickest way to make me more emotional,
yes,
to make me less calm, right?
It's really here and here.
Yeah. So so modeling appropriate ways to take a step back from the conflict. It's not, hey, you need to calm down. The way that you're handling this is unacceptable, and I'm not going to talk to you while you're talking to me like this, right? That's not the right way to do it. The right way to do it is, hey, you really seem really personally offended by this situation. I think I need to take a step back and take some time. I'm going to go to the bathroom. I'm going to get some water. We can come back to this and just kind of like sit down and talk about it. Right. Or, hey, you know what? I have a ton of meetings this afternoon that I can't push back. So can we come back to this a little later on? I want you to know that I hear you and I understand that we need to talk about this. This isn't me saying I'm not going to talk to you about it. It's just saying I can't push back this meeting with my boss, right? So I have to go to that meeting and then I want to talk to you, right? Modeling that need for space and time then lets them know, hey, the next time I'm at that step, maybe I need to take some space and time, right? And then you follow through. You have that conversation with them. And at the end, you say, hey, I want you to know it was fine because it's you and me and because we're working through it. But not a lot of other adults, not a lot of other people in your life are going to let you cuss and yell at them, right? They're just going to push you down and turn you away. So let's find a different way to deal with those emotions next time, right? Let's work on that between, the next couple of weeks. Let's work on how you find other ways to communicate your needs without it seeming like you're attacking somebody with your words, right? That's when you handle that. Not in the middle, hey, calm down, you're acting crazy. Hey, calm down, you're getting a little emotional. Because then I'm setting things on fire and pushing things around, right? And if I'm going to do that, I know that teens will too.
Yeah. So we know we're out of time, but listening to their points, right? Don't spend the time. Goes across for everyone, but especially teens. We didn't talk about this today, but a lot of times we view ourselves as having more experience, and therefore like our opinion is fact, and it is trumps whatever experiences that young person has. And so I think the best way sometimes is just to be a listening ear and to listen to their point of view and take the time to think about your response, so that you can think through, because I think that really helps with that empathy piece when you really truly understand their motivation or what because even though teens do stuff that they may not be able to explain, there's a purpose behind that. So there's a reason why.
Yeah. And the last point is to have quiet times in conflict to get your thoughts straight and let them know that, right? Like, let me think about what you just said. Give me just a minute. I want to think about what you just said so that I can really understand it. I might ask a question about it, right? Like just taking that space and making that space for them is really important too. And also modeling, right? This is modeling. I'm listening to what you're saying to me.
Yeah.
And because of that, I don't have an immediate response for you.
Yep. Okay. Yes. Giving them opportunities to express their opinion, struggles, ideas to lessen the likelihood of future conflict. So that spending that time together to really talk through what happened, what was going on there. This is what on my side, this is why I couldn't do XYZ thing, right? What do you think? Like maybe talking through what their ideas are and really that collaboration, right? Like this is that. But when you are able to explain stuff and you give them an opportunities built in to express those things, then it doesn't build up. It tends to not build up as much, right? Because that's what a lot of times it happens is it's not just this conflict we're having right now. It's all the other ones that I like shoved down deep inside, right? Or I didn't have a safe place to escalate or explode or whatever it looks like, right? It makes them may still be frustrated, doesn't fix anything, but they feel heard and they feel seen, and they might understand things a little bit better about what's actually going on.
Right. And then they also know that in the future, when there's an issue, they can just straight up tell you because you've already been through this conflict. Like it makes it so much easier to have that open communication. And sometimes it's even just with eyes because it's the exact same situation and you told them you can't fix it because you don't have the ability to change things. So then they just look at you like, ma'am, and you're like, yep, that's the thing. We've talked about it. I know. Right. And you just move on. It doesn't have to be this big drawn out thing every time.
Yeah.
We're going to skip this.
Yes, we are. And we kind of talked about this already.
Yes.
But just watching yourself that we as adults automatically have privilege over those youth for those reasons we're talking about, right? Like we have power and control over them. Like Libby was talking about that power, privilege, all of that stuff, or this power. Yes.
Dynamics. Yeah.
Thank you. I was like, what's the word there?
Yeah.
So just.
Right. And so, and again, it's not that you don't tell them that their tone was unacceptable ever. It's that you don't tell them in the minute, right? Because in the minute, to Marina's point earlier, they're communicating with you. They are telling you all the things that they feel and think. And to push that aside just because of the tone that they're using really minimizes them as a whole person. You're saying you are nothing to me, right? And so instead of doing that, listening to what they're saying, and after the fact, after the conflict has de-escalated, after you've talked through, then saying, hey, in the future, the tone you were using was really off-putting. It is something that will get you in trouble, right? And talking them through and educating them why that tone is not something that they should be using.
Oh man, there's still more. It's fine. We're going to flip.
And the thing is, you can't always make sure conflict goes well, right? Somebody put in the chat, you can only control yourself, right? And that is ultimately it, right? You can only control yourself. So remember to stay calm. Remember that often the conflict is not really about you. You're just involved in it, right? Take those breaks as you need. Choose your response. Don't tone police. Don't minimize them as a person, right? Really value them and what they're bringing to you. And if conflict goes wrong, follow up afterward, right? Hey, I made terrible choices in our conversation, right? Own your side of things and apologize for that. I know my tone got crazy. I know that I didn't model the appropriate ways, and I want to apologize to you for that, especially with teens. And they can probably count on one finger, maybe, how many times an adult has apologized to them. And it was probably because they accidentally stepped on their toes, right? Not for those real deep, hard things. And so apologizing, again, also models that. Setting parameters for future conflicts and conversations. And then again, coming back, even if it goes wrong, you can always try and solve it from the back end, right? Hey, I don't like how that conversation ended. I know that I said things that were hurtful. I know that I was hurt. How do we deal with this moving forward? How can we come back together and remind ourselves that we're on the same team?
So there was a question in the chat and I was typing out a response, but I'll go ahead and give a quick one. Thank you to everybody who is here. If you have any other questions, we'll stay on a little bit to answer those until we get told we have to leave. But someone asked, how might this kind of exchange be different in written form? I normally correct their tone in email or text, but maybe I shouldn't. There's a lot of factors there that I don't necessarily know, and it's going to look a little bit different depending on some of those factors. My automatic response is the written form is so hard, and especially for teenagers who have grown up more comfortable with written and text communication, right, or email. Whereas for us, like that's something that we've evolved into, but our natural one was phone calls, right? Like being able to hear somebody's inflection and their tone and, really understand. And text, like 100% in email depends on what mood you're in when you read it or what mood you're in when you write it. Libby and I multiple times have to read each other emails and say, is this okay or is this not, like what's going on here? And so that we can, or do you think this is, this tone is okay, right? Because it's always good to have someone double check. So if possible, having those conversations about that written form in person or virtually, or in a way that they can see you and hear you and really kind of get the inflection that's happening.
I would add, sorry, there is the point that you made that tone depends on how I read it and what I'm feeling when I'm reading it, right? That there are probably unintended tones that you've read into text messages, right? I have a 17-year-old niece and I respond with K, just the letter K, when something, she's like, hey, I need to blah, 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 K. Which to me is just like, yep, we'll do that, no worries. And so she has actually had to ask me, like, are you mad because you just said K? And when I say K, it's because I'm mad. When I write okay, the full 4 letters, that's when I'm happy. Are you mad at, like, what's going on, right? So I think that we also infer tone in written word that is not actually there based off of how we would write things, or how we are feeling about whatever situation or the person at the time as well. And so even if you don't have the ability to have the in-person or the face-to-face or the phone conversation with someone, I also think it's worth just asking the question, like, hey, when I read this, it felt like maybe there was some like frustration. Is there frustration? Can you let me know? And I think that kind of corrects it in and of itself, because if there wasn't frustration, it fixes it. But if there was frustration, then you can say, hey, in the future, just let me know, right? Because I can't always read between the lines, and not everyone else will either, right? And I think that that's a way to handle that too, because again, people infer or ignore tone that just isn't a part of their normal everyday life, that they're just not expecting. So it's like, whatever, I don't understand that you're upset, and now you're upset that I didn't know that you were upset in your text, right? And so I also think sometimes it's just a lot of questions that have to be asked. But yes, to Marina's point, then also a person-to-person conversation and asking those questions and having that conversation is helpful too.
Yeah, and our teens need that reminder if they already know it, but also just understanding that, especially as they move into different spaces, right? So the higher education they go, that's a more professional space, right? We do a lesson with a lot of our young adults on that, talking about how, like, you know, in high school, you may have gotten away with some stuff, but when you go to college, the way that you communicate with your professors and other adults in your life matters, because those are your it's not reviews, what's the word? Recommendations. Those are your future recommendations for grad school, for jobs, for all of those things. And so it's especially for scholarships. And so it's especially important that when you're writing or having any kind of written communication, that you're aware of those things, right? What are you pouring into it? How is a better way to say something? And so I don't think that tone, I think tone especially is one of those things that, like, having a conversation, like, what did you mean this here? Because this is how I took it, right? So it's not it's all about the way you approach it. That's all of this, right? Like, it's the way you approach it. So not being scared to have that conversation, but like the way that you do it and when you choose to have it matters.
For sure.
And you feel free to email us. I saw some people, like, this is going to be on Gladney's YouTube channel, but we also do trainings for other things, for small groups, for stuff. So if there's people in your life that you feel like need this reminder, we are also available. So you can always reach out to us by emailing us, or if you have any questions.